Tell us what listeners out there can expect from the archive podcast from Pace Magazine.
Well, each week we look at a different musical icon and dig back into our archives. We have over 100,000 recordings of live music and comedy, but mixed in there are a bunch of interviews from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And a lot of these just really haven't seen the light of day. And so in looking at some of these interviews, I thought it would be really interesting to put them in podcast form. So we have a different interview each week, or a pair of interviews in the case of our first episode. And, it's fun to say that my first guest on the podcast is John Lennon.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to debut, isn't it?
Yeah, that doesn't get much bigger than a Beatle.
Where did you get these interviews from?
So we've purchased a bunch of archives, starting back from the Bill Graham archives that became Wolfgang's Vault, which is our parent company. So we've got all these concerts from San Francisco in the 60s with the Grateful Dead and Jefferson Starship or Jefferson Airplane, I should say. And that was sort of the beginning of it all. Since then, we've purchased archives from Newport Folk Festival and from the King Biscuit Radio Hour, King Biscuit Flower Hour, and Starfleet, and all these different radio programs that went over the air where they would broadcast these live performances. And mixed in with that were some radio interviews that were done, and they were broadcast at the time, and it's just sort of been in our archives since then.
So what can listeners expect?
Well, from this first episode with John Lennon, we've got two interviews, one from 1969, just before he left the Beatles, and then another from 1980, just months before his death. And what was fascinating to me about these interviews is they feel like two different people. The way that he changed from 1969 to 1980, matured as a musician, as a person. You hear him in 1980 talking about, he'd spent the last 5 years basically being a stay-at-home dad, and talking about how, you don't get a Grammy for making your kid lunch. Nobody's applauding you. It can be difficult, but it's, just as rewarding as what he was doing. And to me, that was really just intense to see the difference between in 1969 when he's doing a bed-in with Yoko and talking about peace and getting ready to sort of embark on this solo career and this collaboration with Yoko Ono. It's just two really interesting points in his life.
How long will you keep doing this? Is this something that you're just going to do for 6 months, a year, and then see what happens?
So the first season is 12 episodes long, 12 weeks long. It's got John Lennon, David Bowie, Keith Richards, Bono, James Brown, Tina Turner. It kind of goes on and on like that. I think we'll be able to keep doing seasons, 12 at a time for quite some time. We saved some good ones for the second season, which will likely air this fall.
Are all of these interviews going to be old school, or are there some that could have been, a couple weeks ago, and it'll be part of the system that you get from your parent company? We've
got some great interviews that we've done recently, but I kind of like keeping this. It's called the archive, so I kind of like digging back. At some point we may dig back to interviews that we've done through Pace, or the interviews that I've done. We've been doing this since 2002. But right now, there's so many interview podcasts out there that you can hear, the artists of right now. I love the idea of hearing from these artists when they were in their prime. Each of these is sort of captured at the prime. And we've got Bono in 1987. It's the idea is just to hear from these musical legends right when they were in the midst of their sort of peak creativity.
Gotcha. In your opinion, you've been doing this for a long time. Is there some kind of difference when it comes to interviewing people like this, you think, compared now to 20, 30 years ago? I know back then, if Lennon or whomever did an interview, you had to go get that issue of Rolling Stone magazine, and then you read it. And then, you never would think, years later, this will be available on a podcast or anything like that. Do you think there's a difference in the whole interviewing process of these types of people then till now? And if so, will it be very kind of unique to hear these interviews taken from a time whenever from the past, from the archives?
Yeah, one of the interviewers who keeps popping up is Lisa Robinson, who was a music journalist and radio DJ, and she's got the one of the biggest differences is just the era. So the conversation, I mean, you can hear it doesn't sound like it's a contemporary interview. It sounds like it's done of the moment. And some of that, some of the interviewers that we have, I would say there's moments where you're like, oh, it's kind of cheesy, but at the time it for the radio and for the audience, I don't think it was cheesy at all. It was just of the moment, and sounds a little different than the way that we would approach it right now. There's some great moments of hearing David Bowie describe himself as really kind of shy, and that talking about how he's almost given up music because it just doesn't feel real to him, how it feels kind of fake and manufactured, and he kind of like to go back to painting because that feels more real to him, and just imagine it, being glad that didn't happen and that he kept with it. But each of these, there's things that they say that just have stuck with me since working on these podcasts.
Gotcha.
But one of my favorite quotes from Bono was just talking about how, when he was just describing what U2 was doing, he talked about taking the feeling of love from the 60s and the anger of the music of the 70s and kind of melding those together into what U2 is. And I thought, oh, what a great description of what I love about U2.
All right. Well, is there anything else that we didn't go over? Anything else you would like to add?
The archive is available to stream on pacemagazine.com, where you can actually listen to some of the concerts. We put music around it that we also own, live recordings that aren't the typical way that you hear a song, and you can stream those concerts along with listening to the podcast at pacemagazine.com, or you can download it from iTunes without the full concert.
It must be cool for a magazine to expand in this kind of way and offer your before readers something else.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to package the stuff we love in different ways. When I was in journalism school, I was studying writing, and never imagined that I'd spend part of my time, ever putting together basically what's a radio show, what's an hour long or 45-minute long compilation of music and interviews, and it's fun to do it in different ways.
Yeah, well, radio is not all it's cracked up to be. All right. Well, anything else?
I love what you guys do. So.
Oh, well, thank you.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, Tom.